right, we are just a couple minutes after 9, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll have some folks hop in with us. My name is Daniela Perry. I serve as the Vice President of the Georgia Chamber Foundation for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. Excited to be here for this session. Just a special thanks to all of our anchor investors. You'll see the organizations here listed. So if you work with any of these, please tell them thank you for investing in the workforce in Metro Atlanta and for their support of Max. So again, my name is Daniela Perry, and we're so excited to have a great session this morning with colleagues at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. They've recently completed a great talent supply report, and so they're going to give us an overview of their findings. Make sure too, as we're going through, if y'all got questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll kind of work through them once we get through it. But we're looking forward to a great session. So we've got Tim Cairl, Justin Haight, and Zach Fiore. So Tim, I believe we're going to start with you. And thanks again for the full team for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Daniela. Always a pleasure to be with you and to be with you all this morning. Let me give me 1 second to share my screen here. And Daniela, can you let me know if you can see that everything okay?
Yep, it looks great, Tim.
Okay, great. So a little bit of background. My name is Tim Cairl. I'm Senior Director for Talent Development at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and I get to lead the wonderful talent team that's with me on the call today. This report is the fourth now in a series of reports we have done since 2016 that looks at supply and demand of degrees that the state confers, and by degrees I mean of all levels, everything from certificates through four-year degrees from the state, and then compares that supply to the demand from job postings in the job market. And then we look at where there are gaps and where there are opportunities, how things are growing or not growing across different industries. We use that data to then inform some of our policy and program recommendations. We also look at things that have been working or not working since the last report. And then we try to draw some inferences that we see happening in the data and what we think may be explaining some of the movement from that work. Excuse me as I jump ahead. So in an ideal world, we have this supply and demand that happens across sectors. You have job demand from employers, increased talent, increased training capacity, more conferred credentials, and then you have a realignment of those credentials to job demand. We all know that we don't live in a perfect world, and certainly with the human interaction component, a lot of things can get a little off or get a little over for some of these particular buckets. So our purpose in the data is really to shine some light on where things are happening within this particular supply and demand cycle. Probably not new news for any of the folks on this call, but just looking through total employment, we know that Georgia has continually outpaced the nation. Metro Atlanta leading the way, of course, for that in the state, but we have really been ahead of the curve when it comes to national employment and labor market. There are a lot of things that affect this factor, supply and demand. We've got importation of talent, we've got growing our own talent, we have natural growth of population, and then we look across the degrees conferred. This is just to give you a general snapshot. The thing I like to point out here is sort of the low growth percentages that are happening across all of these markers. And that many of the markers have been slowly declining as we get closer and closer to current date and looking ahead to the next 4 to 5 years. Migration trends, we have analyzed this market to market. Nobody is really doing super well across any measure when it comes to importation of talent. Atlanta is not alone, and Georgia is not alone in that struggle to find good talent. And when we dive a little bit deeper and we look across industries and job postings, it's very clear that Georgia has large, in some cases, massive growth across nearly every industry in our state. And what you're looking at here are just job postings by industries. So this is one measure of growth. And with some industries like construction, professional and IT services, that growth has been pretty phenomenal. With construction, 159% growth since 2017. And keep in mind that we had a very large demarcation that happened in 2020. So if you think about just the growth that we've had since even that point, it's quite phenomenal at how Georgia has rebounded. We're going to slice it one additional way, which is job postings by occupation. So that first one, I'll go back just to compare. This first one is job postings by industry. And the next one is job postings by occupation, just so that we're all clear on what we're looking at. So when we cut it by occupation, we can really zero in closer to the actual job functions that are inside not just one industry, but those occupations that cut across multiple industries. So I'll pick on things like software development and engineering, which appear to be pushing the IT and computer services demands. Those cut across so many of the industry sectors. And then while freight and warehouse work are driving a huge portion of our logistics sector, but this is just sort of one slice. But again, you see across every measure of these job postings from 2017 to 2021 that we had pretty phenomenal growth, even for those which have been at sustainably high demand, like registered nursing and truck driving. When we look across just occupations for entry-level postings, those that are requiring the least amount of experience, we see some differences happening here, particularly for fast food and counter workers. So this is more of your front end, your customer-facing roles. What this data would infer to us when we have these customer-facing roles where you have experience requirements going up and up, what that would tell us is that there's something happening with this particular type of occupation. And if you bear with me for a minute, I'll play out a scenario for you, which is since 2020, when you had a heavy emphasis on those customer-facing roles and a real need to refill many of those roles since March of 2020. Many employers, in a panic of trying to find employees who would stick in a particular spot, have started requiring experience for what should be a very entry-level role. So we get that weird dichotomy of entry-level roles that are requiring prior experience. And what that indicates to us is that we've got some churn for some of these areas where you have these entry-level roles that are requiring prior experience. Not surprising, this data, this has been, I think, since the beginning of our putting these reports together, that registered nurses and truck driving have been at the top of this list. We want to talk about skills. This is another important factor when we look across job demand and job postings. Communications, management, and customer service are still at the top of the skills list. But one thing that might be of interest for some of the folks on this call is that multitasking has moved into this top 15. So when you think about the focus that we've had in the past few years about work-life balance and what that those working situations look like, the idea that multitasking is moving up and the top skills might give some of us a pause. And then a new one on this list, lifting ability, which sort of goes along with that logistics, warehouse working, and front end work. That sort of corresponds with that growth that we're seeing there along top skills. I'll talk a little bit more about skills later. I want to move now to the supply side, which is the degrees and certificates that are being supplied. This is a big agglomeration of the general categories for all of those degrees and certificates. This is just to kind of show one for most of our particular buckets of concentration when it comes to certificates and degrees being supplied. It's been fairly stable since 2016, with two very glaring exceptions that I want to point out that should give a lot of folks on this webinar a pause, and that is education and homeland security. The demand side for those positions has not decreased. It has actually gone up, but our supply is dropping. So for instance, like education has moved from third to fourth to fifth. We're declining in how many of the total, what percentage of the total degrees being conferred are parts of education or homeland security. So that should raise an alarm when we're thinking about workforce training, and we're thinking about K-12 systems and all of those things that we as professionals rely upon to really work in this conferring space. I want to take a look now at our certificates. So these are our certificates of all sizes, but not a bachelor's or associate's degree. And when we look through this data, business management marketing is still the largest gap category. The ranking on this is which of these certificates have the biggest gap in supply and demand. So the black bar that you're seeing here is the supply, and the red and gray are our demand side. So what are the job postings that are asking for that particular certificate? So you see business management still the largest gap, and of note is as we drop the overall requirement for some of our four-year degrees, which is happening across some job postings, this data set is going to get a little more chaotic and a little more drastic, but there is opportunities for employers here that are thinking about professional development for their existing workforce, thinking about that upskilling and those other opportunities there. What we should see here is that there should be opportunity, particularly for employers with a large set of what I would think of as entry level, or maybe not as high up in the hierarchy of an organization. There's big opportunities for that professional development in this particular space when it comes to those add-on certificates that could fill those higher need roles that are requiring these particular certificates. For our two-year or associate degrees, health and business are still the largest gaps, but computer and IT services is quickly growing to try to take over those number two or number one spots. I always make sure to point out, people ask a lot with this particular set why liberal arts and sciences is so oversupplied. Some, but not all of that gap can be explained by students who are looking to transfer once they finish their two-year degree. So they're getting that two-year degree and probably completing a huge amount of their core courses before they transfer on to other longer programs. Similar to our other degrees, business management and health, followed by IT, also lead this bachelor degree supply and demand category. The expanded demand, which I want to touch on here, it's that gray area that you see. This can get a little bit wonky, but for those of you who are data nerds like me, bear with me for a second. You can have a degree that is a one-to-one match for the supply. So if I'm looking for a business manager and I am asking for a business management degree, that expanded demand are those where I'm asking for a business manager and I will take business management degree, but I'll also take things like a marketing degree and accounting degrees, some other type of associated degree for that role. That's where that expanded demand. There are some great algorithms from the data sets that we pulled that include all of that additional supply data. So that's why we include that in here as well. So now I want to talk about what did we find? We've been digging through this data coming from a lot of big sources. What were the big takeaways? The first and number one is that Georgia has been really good at economic development. You know, we have had crazy expansion of not just jobs, but multiple industries, even some growth of new industries across the state, like our manufacturing and our EV and our Q cells, and the number of like these big companies that are moving in, sort of expanding these new industries into parts of Georgia. But with that, we have also had an increase in the total number of degrees that we're supplying. So the total number of jobs is increasing, total numbers of degrees and certificates is increasing, but jobs are increasing more. So I want to say that again. So Georgia has done really well at creating jobs, being that job creator. And we've also done really well at supplying degrees and certificates, but the number of jobs has gone up faster and more total. So what we have is we still have an imbalance, even though we're doing really good work. The second thing, and this goes back to that part I was talking about churn, is that the early work experience for particularly our young workers is even more critical now than it was before. And this cuts across so many types of work opportunities, from internships to community work, more on the volunteer side even, to leadership positions that people don't necessarily think about as work experience, but you're gaining those valuable skills that will help you in the workplace. That type of early experience is becoming more and more critical when we think about matching the skills and we think about matching that entry level needs with an individual. The third thing I'll say is that there isn't one solution that's going to get us out of this problem. We talk about growing our own talent, about importation of talent, growing our own talent better. All of these things are super important. One of those is not going to get us out of this gap situation that we're in. We really have to do better at all of them. And that includes looking at the talent that we have in our own existing companies. So within with our own companies around the state, what are those pockets of talent that we may have trapped in entry-level roles and not realize that there's an opportunity for upskilling and professional development and ways to connect pathways to our existing workforce that we haven't necessarily thought about. So all of these things are super important when we think about closing those gaps and how we can work collectively to solve some of these problems. And then the last thing I'll say is, we, and then by we, I mean collectively, we as a state look at job demand as a way to figure out how we're going to supply programs and how we're going to account for classroom space and number of teachers that we need to hire and where the market is going, and all of these other factors, from state agencies to universities to employers and economic development agencies, all look at these particular job numbers to gauge what we should be doing. And what we realize as we dig through these numbers and then talk to our companies is that the job numbers only tell one part of the story. For instance, if I am a company who is posting for a particular job, and let's say I'm looking for a data analyst, and I post that data analyst job, that data analyst posting might equal one job position, but it also might equal 10, 100. Is it an evergreen job posting that I just leave up, and I'm trying to pull 10 or 15 jobs down from that one posting? So even with some markets, especially those who are growing really rapidly, and I'll pick on IT just as an example, I might have that one occupation posting, but I really need to fill 10 jobs. So we know that even within the numbers, there's some discrepancy, particularly on the demand side. So we're aiming for future iterations of this data as we present it, hopefully on a quarterly and biannual basis, is that we really dive into more of what the actual employment numbers are, particularly for some of these cases where we have a large gap, and maybe that will help us tell a better story about what's actually happening in the marketplace. So those are the four main findings that we had. We also, with this report, really want to look at some positive things that are happening. What has happened in the state since we started doing this data. And there's some really good stuff that's been happening. We've had things like the college completion grants, that really look at that last mile funding for our 2 and 4 year students to address any of those financial hiccups that could happen at the end of a student's run, to take them off track. When the state has invested so much money in trying to get that student across the line, it doesn't make sense that we would let a small financial hurdle stop them from completing. We also have things like four-year degree requirements that are changing on the job demand side. Although many positions still require a degree, some of them are rethinking that and moving more to a skills-based approach, which I know we've actually talked about on this program before. Dual enrollment expansion, that particular opportunity continues to grow for our K-12 students. And then we have also seen the state and our technical college systems and others put more emphasis and more funding into apprenticeship programs and those work-based learning experiences that are so critical, particularly on that early experience side. We've also seen fantastic changes with second chances legislation coming from the State General Assembly, and also on the employer side, just a lot of rethinking about sort of those legacy barriers that we've had in place that are just no longer needed or need to be completely rethought or overhauled. So it's been very encouraging to see that also enter the workforce discussion. On the funding side, and we point out a number of these in the talent supply report, which is we've had emphasis on expanded computer science, looking at those IT growth, not just in the industry of IT, but across every sector on job occupations. The focus on childcare and sort of those wraparound family benefit areas that really need better support, increased school counselors, last mile funding, which I talked about, and then a new one that many of you might have seen at the Governor's Workforce Summit a couple weeks ago, which is the Georgia Match program, aiming to allow more students access to our 2- and 4-year degree systems. So we're very optimistic about what that particular program will bring. And then the last one I want to point out are the number of workforce and employment changes that are happening on the employer side. And I know you're going to hear from Zach and Justin here shortly, but I do want to point out that there is some really inventive things happening on the employer side that I'm glad we get to highlight a little bit of that today. And I'll talk about Max Talent Collaborative. We also include, in addition to those positive things or bright spots, we also include some recommendations for what we think could improve what's happening in the system. So that's things in some big broad categories. We include a number of markers like supporting students and building capacity, this refocus on skill building and skills-based hiring, and expanded collaboration, and aligning all of these incentives that are coming from the state and from private industry to what we actually want to see happen in the workforce. So it goes back a little bit more to the we've tried this and now we want to see what's happened. And a huge part of that, which I know many of you on this call know, are those partnerships that we make between industry and our education partners and our nonprofit and community partners. So I want to bring on Justin Haight, who is the Metro Atlanta Chamber's Director of Talent Partnerships, to talk a little bit about that importance and why this is important for closing some of the skills gap that we talked about today. So Justin, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So once again, good morning, everybody. I'm Justin Haight, the Director of Talent Partnerships here at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And, as Tim mentioned, let's talk a little bit about the why the Metro Chamber, really views public-private partnerships as really one of the keys to really implement strong, sustainable, and successful workforce development solutions and really help our education system. And, generally it's known that partnerships like these between businesses, education, community groups, nonprofits, you name it, they're really more important than ever when it comes to ensuring that Georgia has that skill and talent that we need. We want to make sure that we're remaining the #1 state in which to do business. In fact, that's really one of the main reasons the Metro Chamber really decided to make talent and workforce development as a key focus of the organization, because we really see the opportunity that we have to implement some really big, new, bold ideas into the system, because we know that that's what's going to take. And I think that the data shows that in the talent supply report. And the interesting thing is really every single industry across the entire nation is really feeling this talent squeeze. Employers are really struggling to find that qualified applicant. And I think that's really the key, the qualified aspect to it. Individuals that are truly skilled, that can be plug and play into a job. It's harder than ever to find these individuals as they're leaving college. But paradoxically, it's interesting that these same students are actually struggling to find employment in their particular field once they graduate college or leave university, technical school, either because they can't find a particular opening in their field or they can't find one with a competitive wage. So there's definitely some rebalancing that needs to get done, which is something that is consistently mentioned within the TSR report about that rebalancing needed to be done between the degrees that are being conferred and the jobs in which that we're hiring for here in multiple industries. And so colleges and universities, they're also really struggling as well. It's not just the employer side. So more so than ever, college career professionals, they're having to be pulled into so many different directions. You think about how many industries that they're serving for, how many students are on their campus, how many hiring fairs, how many internships they're setting up for. There's only so much time in the day that they can really dedicate to developing these partnerships. And if you're an employer here in Georgia, you start to think about the organizations that you could potentially be tapping into on the education side. And it's over 100 colleges and universities here in Georgia. Now, a lot of those are private and smaller or maybe niche in their focus, but you can also see very easily how difficult it can be for a chief human resource officer to say, hey, I've got relationships with UGA, Georgia Tech, Emory, and we're getting great talent from these organizations. But how do we make sure that the Chattahoochee Techs of the world, the Georgia Gwinnett colleges, the Clayton States, how do we make sure that all of these stories are being told equally and that their amazing talent they're producing every single year are also getting put on the radar of all of our great companies here in Georgia? So once again, that's really where these private-public partnerships come in and are so key. And I think whether it's the Metro Chamber or any chamber, Cobb Chamber, DeKalb Chamber, or really any industry association, we really do view as using intermediaries like these organizations to really help implement workforce strategies and specifically help develop public-private partnerships as the key resource to or key mechanism to go about. Once again, just because of the sheer amount of responsibilities that are already weighing on our HR departments on the private sector, but also our college and career staffs at the university level. So by using an organization like the Metro Chamber, the Georgia Chamber, industry associations, they can really take a lot of burden off of the other parties so they can continue with their normal day-to-day jobs. And these intermediaries can do things such as implement data, pull data, convene various organizations, bring resources together, and really just add a little bit more emphasis to the work that we're doing here within the system, and also has a little bit of that subject matter expertise to help navigate the various systems here in Georgia, like knowing the technical college system in Georgia, understanding how WIOA funding works, can be really powerful tools when you're getting these groups of organizations together to ideally create some public-private partnerships.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I'm glad you brought up some of the funding and some of the organizations that we should be thinking about. Are there any of those kind of bright spot organizations around the state that you'd be interested in highlighting, or a program that's maybe doing some really good work? I know that we mentioned a lot in the report, but is there one that stood out to you or one that you'd like to call attention to?
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of the German American Chamber of Commerce's apprenticeship program, specifically their German style apprenticeship. And really, the minutia of the program doesn't necessarily matter for this particular topic. It's really the concepts that they implement that I view as very strong in terms of what we want to do for public-private partnerships. So it is based on an apprenticeship model, but ultimately what the German American Chamber does here located in Atlanta is they have a set of groupings of local manufacturers in a geographical spot of the state. They convene these manufacturers together, and then they pair them with local educators in their region, whether that be a technical college and or a college and career academy. So right there, you have a chamber, an intermediary, pulling a lot of that heavy lifting, bringing industry players in with those professionals on the education side. But beyond that, what they also do is help administer examinations that go beyond what are part of the technical college's work. So they have additional certifications. Those additional certifications that they're bringing to the table is also another added value They bring in supportive services and really just act as another subject matter expert to really help make sure this entire process is going, because we want to make sure that we're allowing our education partners to do what they do best, working in the classroom, working with students. We want to make sure that our employer partners are doing what they do best, and that's working on the manufacturing floor, providing on-the-job training. And so that intermediary in the German chamber is bringing everybody together, bringing extra credentials, extra resources, helping with communication, marketing. And all of a sudden, you've got a program that's been operating for over 10 years. It expanded to multiple places across the state. And you have a model that's very repeatable and it's sustainable. And I think that's what's key. And I think that they're a great example that can be applied to many different programs, even outside of apprenticeship.
That's awesome. Thanks, Justin, for highlighting that. I do want to shift and now talk a little bit about what's happening on the employer side. And for that, I'd like to bring in Zach Fiore, who is our talent pipeline project manager here at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Zach, can you tell us a little bit about the talent collaborative that you're working with is standing up and how you see employers responding to some of the demands that we talked about today?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. MAC is really excited to be able to share some of this work with you all. So one big part of my role here at MAC as the Talent Pipeline Project Manager is the ATL Talent Collaborative. And this is a group of 22 of our investor organizations, and specifically their chief human resource officers and their TA, talent acquisition executives. And we've pulled them together to really highlight exactly what their most critical positions are right now, so that instead of just assuming a lot of the supply and demand and relying on this labor statistics, we can go directly to the employer and actually ask them exactly what they're going to need. And part of this work has been making sure that all of these employers that are hiring for the same positions are aligned on what that could look like, so that we can in turn share this with future partners. So a lot of the work up to this point has been on aligning hiring requirements and hiring language. Something that's been really fascinating for us from the employer side is you talk about moving to a skills-based system, but all of these employers may use the same word to mean completely different skills. The one thing I think about often is communication. That could mean any number of things that you actually need in a candidate, whether it's the ability to present, to draft an email, to field customer questions. Trying to get all of these employers onto one page to really define exactly what they need, so that we can really start to align that supply and demand really concretely and frankly with the people that actually make the difference. So with this group, these 22 companies represent almost 2 million employees globally. So part of this work really is looking at need at scale to see what we could do together, tapping into a lot of the education and training provider resources that we have throughout the state, and make sure that we align them to kind of be working towards the same goal. So from this work, we have a really cyclical approach where we regularly make sure that what we're looking at is still everybody's most critical positions. So for this year so far, these organizations have decided to focus on software engineers, data analysts, and frontline warehouse and logistics workers. So as you can see, kind of broad swath there, and honestly, not much of a surprise from the IT and the data side. We've heard that over and over again from employers. But we've done a lot of work to make sure that we have really concrete demand numbers from them, to be able to bring this to colleges and universities and say, hi, here's what you are producing right now and what your supply is, but this is the actual demand we have. What can we do together and collaboratively to be able to meet that gap? And one of the benefits of doing this collaboratively is, frankly, these employers are already competing for this talent. That's not lost on them. I thought we'd get more pushback at first, bringing all of them together, but they know they're already competing, so they might as well work together to fix it. And so luckily, pulling all of them together lessens the burden on each of them individually to be able to come to the table with resources and time and effort, to be able to actually create some sort of formalized partnerships with these universities and education systems that will actually meet that supply and demand, or at least close it slightly. So that's kind of general overview, but definitely something that we're really excited about and excited to be able to continue that cycle. So we're always kind of responding quickly.
That's awesome. Thanks, Zach. I like what you said about, the being able to drop the competitiveness. I think there's a growing sense, particularly among Georgia employers, that more is more.
Yeah.
Whether that's catering to specific parts of the state or even certain industries. I think firsthand that growing talent, even for one company or one occupation, affects so many industries across the board. So when we think about cybersecurity, it's not just a cybersecurity firm that's benefiting from growth in that. So it's really fantastic work, and I appreciate you highlighting some of that for us today. I'm going to share one more time just to make sure that you all have our contact information and that you have the website where you can download this report. It's talentsupply.report.com. We also have a second report coming out in the fourth quarter this year that looks at student interest and aptitude in our K-12 systems and really trying to figure out what we're doing on that early side to steer some interest and some awareness of certain types of careers and industries, particularly in the K-12 space. We'll have more information about the ATL Talent Collaborative. I know I saw something in the chat asking about that already. But just wanted to share, like, this is a new initiative for us, although it's not necessarily new to United States. It's new to our state, and we're very proud of the work that Zach and Justin are doing in that particular area. There will be more publicly coming about that as we move towards the new year and we launch the second round of the collaborative and have some data to share back. My contact information is on here, and Danielle, I'll also be happy to share this presentation if you want to share that out to the group.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I think we've had a lot of interest and really excited too about that interest in aptitude report. I know I've done a similar variation before, and it's super helpful, especially as we know that it's really important to increase career awareness so people understand what options they have. We've got a lot of questions. So first, kind of going back, what constitutes Homeland Security? Could y'all share a little bit more about kind of all the things that focus in that realm?
Yeah, there's a lot in there, to be honest. But if you think about it from the terms of the security side, so that goes everything from police to some first responders are also in that particular group, even to private security and some of the TSA type or related positions there. And that's a big bucket. But that's that basic designation. And think about it more from a public safety realm, I think from a state or local level, even beyond the Homeland Security moniker.
Perfect. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Had a lot of great comments too. Everyone's excited about the expansion for dual enrollment. Looking forward to getting the presentation afterwards. And we've got one question. Is there a statewide effort to expand work-based learning programs?
Yes. I say that because some of this will look very differently depending on where you are in the state. The first thing I'll always point to is your local school system. I would start there. And that sometimes happens at the school level, sometimes at the district level, depending on where you are in the state. So for a lot of our metro school systems, it probably might even be at the school level, but I could see where you move to where you have less high schools in a particular district, it might happen at the district level. So some of it is just having a conversation with your principal or with your school superintendent to find the right connection. I know for business that is such a barrier sometimes that we don't always know who to go to. And it is one of the advantages that I think a lot of our more rural areas have, is that often you can find those people very easily, much more easily than if you have a district with thousands of administrative employees. So to that end, I would say, go to the source, go to the head and ask the question. It's always better to get a referral than to try to dig through an employee or staff directory and try to find that person. I would not be afraid. Most superintendents and principals love to talk about the work they're doing and the partnerships they've created. So I would say go to the leader and ask directly. But our K-12 schools is where I would start with that.
No, absolutely. And I think because there is so much variation, to your point, I mean, I know we've talked to a lot of districts that are in rural communities and they have interest in having a work-based learning program, but like they don't have transportation or the funds for that. So a ton of variation. I would say probably, yes, there is an effort to get it more statewide, but in terms of like what's feasible in your community. I will say we recently got a grant from the Department of Education to work specifically with rural districts. And part of that is you could apply for funds in work-based learning. So if y'all know counterparts in rural Georgia that have got interest in expanding the work-based learning program, we got a $3 million grant to help do that. So not Atlanta, but we're all working together to kind of fix all this. And Darlene, thank you for your comments too about the importance of public-private partnerships, really thinking about our foreign-born workforce, making sure we're able to effectively utilize those in the workforce. It's such a key part of our talent base, and wanting to make sure that we are really thinking holistically about talent. I know visas have been a bit of a tricky subject from the federal side, especially post-COVID. But Tim, don't know if y'all got any thoughts too that y'all came through the report or things that y'all saw in that space as well.
Yeah, I think I'll go back to one of the findings is just that don't put all the eggs in one basket. It can't be all growing our own talent, and it can't be all importation or all upskilling. The point here is that every industry and every organization and every school system kind of has to have its hand in all of those pots. We all have a part to play, making sure that this is a place people want to come to and work and be engaged. And there's policy in that, there's program in that, there's community in that, and chambers and partners all have a role in ensuring that those are all robust and big systems. And then we also have to do a good job at training our own talent. So it's a balance game of making sure that we're pulling all the levers that we need to. It's a big task, not going to lie, but I think it's the importance of having these associations like MAX and the Talent Collaborative and sort of these big arching places where employers and partners can come together to tackle these problems. It's going to take a lot of people and a lot of partners in different spots to make that happen.
Absolutely. We did have one question about the Talent Collaborative again, and I know you shared there's more information on that last slide, and everybody will get the deck. So if people are interested in kind of learning more, I know y'all be sharing more on their website, and kind of that's the best next step for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep it that we're going to use that talentsupply.report.com as like the repository for when we publish not just our quarterly or annual talent updates around data. We'll also start to publish some of the public facing work that we're doing around the Talent Collaborative. Like I said, we're only about a year in, so we don't have a lot of markers to share yet. But we will get much more public about that type of work and what successes or challenges that those employer collaboratives are seeing. And we will put all that through that website. So you'll have a central spot to go to and not have to go to a bunch of different places.
Perfect. And also have another note about Job Corps, who has an untapped talent pool and making sure we're able to connect folks. I think, Tim, your point about making sure we're really thinking holistically. I know when we talk with employers, everybody wants that silver bullet, and I think school systems want it too. And it's just a bit more complicated than that. So it really takes all of us to work together. I did have a question about the new report that y'all got coming out about interest and aptitude, how it's going to be connected with school systems. I think that's a great question. Would love your thoughts.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Georgia K-12 schools, particularly middle and high school, get 1,000 what they call licenses or connections per year that students can use to do an interest and aptitude. And for many of you who may be old school like me, I remember Myers-Briggs and some of the other like career interest ones that we did. The U-Science application is much different. It does a piece of that, but it also really dives into the aptitude side and asks very engaging and challenging questions for students as they take that test. I don't like to call it a test. Some of it feels gamified. It doesn't even feel like you're taking a test when you take it. And what it gives you is not only the positions or the occupations that the student is showing an interest. It's also thinking about aptitude and what the student has indicated their strong suits are, their strong skills, and then it matches those two things up. So you have interest, aptitude, and then the cross of the two things. So it's really fascinating data. But 100,000 middle and high schoolers have free access to that through their K-12 schools throughout the year. And so what we're doing is pulling down a large sample of that data and then making it available. And that goes both to our K-12, we'll have it on our website, we share it freely with partners. But it should be out in fourth quarter of this year. So we'll be well in advance of when we move into the new year.
Wonderful. And I know that's one thing we've talked a lot about with the school district side, is they don't always have that good information about job demand. And so, some of our members might get a little frustrated because they feel like maybe the school system's not being as responsive. So I feel like that's a great opportunity for us to help, provide them the good data and information, because they've got full-time jobs trying to educate our sweet little ones, and make sure they are healthy and happy and learning. And so I think the more we can make sure that we can kind of bring those two different groups together, so they're not speaking at each other, but with each other, is great. So really excited to see that report that's coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
We do have a question too around occupational licensing. I know that was something, I don't know if it was specifically mentioned in the report, but certainly something that I feel like we both do, but wanting to know what the chambers are doing related to occupational licensing reform.
Yeah, so there's actually a study committee from the General Assembly that's happening right now. And we're excited that, one, it wasn't just legislators looking at this particular issue. They're bringing in some of the partner orgs, including us and some folks from the employer side, to dive a little deeper on this. It's something the General Assembly and the state legislature has been kind of picking around a little bit and thinking about, what does our occupational licensing system look like? There's a lot of boards that are responsible for the state licensing systems, but it's not clear necessarily on what the rules and regulations and pathways, as individuals are thinking about everything from, cosmetology to nursing, like you name it. There's a lot there. I think what we will see is some transparency initiatives that come out of that committee, which will be very welcome, not just from the employer side, but I'm sure from the participant side too, to understanding how to navigate that. So we're encouraged that the legislature is looking at this, and this is a big policy area. One area that I'll point out that has come up time and time again, particularly over the last couple of years, were military spouses and military families. As they move from state to state, and Georgia's blessed to have a lot of those families in the state, but it can be a real challenge when one of those individuals in the family has a license from another state and they move here and they're trying to navigate that system to get their license approval here to continue doing the work that they've been doing. So we're hopeful that the legislature will make some transparency and sort of those fixes that will better connect the talent that we've got here to those jobs they really want to do and are licensed to do.
No, absolutely. Coming from a military family, that was the exact situation that my family went through in terms of how my mom was able and my dad was serving. So important issue. And I know we've testified to on behalf of that study committee that's chaired by Larry Walker in the Senate. And then I know that our president and CEO, and I believe y'all's too, Katie, is serving on the Georgia Works Commission that's run by the Secretary of State as well. That's also meeting this summer and fall.
Yes.
So anyways, lots to say on licensure reform. So hopefully a lot of progress is going to get made, but absolutely, Tim, I think you're exactly right that we've had a lot of talk about it, and it looks like we're going to make a lot of forward progress, which is exciting. Just wanted to, because we're kind of wrapping up, I was curious how findings from this year's report kind of compare to previous iterations, and if this is kind of giving y'all a different look than maybe what years and years past, or how does it kind of compare for y'all?
One thing, I go back to that, what I think I talked about a little bit at the beginning about the Georgia just doing an outstanding job at economic development. And it really is fascinating just from a numbers geek standpoint, how broad that growth is, and that it's not so many regions around the country and so many states you go to, so much of their growth is really based in one particular industry or even around one group of employers. But Georgia just has a really wide variety. We know some of the things that are inherent, right? Like we know the Home Depots and the Cokes, and we know these big industry drivers. But what we don't realize is what the spillover effect from that. Even if you think about film industry, landing in Georgia and the massive growth we've had here, there's so much other industry that's affected by that growth of that one that it kind of lifts everybody. And we are just seeing that play out year to year. We really thought, particularly with the 2020 blip in employment drop, that we would see a lot of that, a realignment happening, and that some industries would maybe suffer a bit, and that some occupations might fall away. But what we were pleasantly surprised to find is that the recovery was really broad and really big. And that's a credit to the folks who work every day on this call, and the policymakers. Everybody just kind of had a hand in making that a reality. So that has been really encouraging. The second thing was really just realizing that as we talked to employers, that the numbers didn't always directly match up. And that goes back to that difference in job postings versus the number of positions. So I think what we will see as we continue to analyze this data going in the future is that we'll have what the job postings say, and then we'll get a little more of an industry or occupation snapshot for what the actual positions, what the actual skill requirements. We'll dive more onto that direct side. So maybe get a little more granular for those who want to go deeper on some of these occupation or industry side.
No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think we always think of the big names of your Kia, Hyundai, Q-Cells, but the network of suppliers that brings into the state, I think, is truly unprecedented. And I think, to your point, I think that reason why Georgia's been so successful and been able to be resilient through so much transition has changed is because we've had, a diverse set of companies that have come in and backgrounds, talent. And so we've really been able to weather the storm when other folks have not been able to do so as much. We did have one question about if y'all have a summary statement kind of explaining the data as it relates to economic development recovery.
Yeah, we are very lucky to have Dr. Jerry Parrish on staff as our economist, who is working on that as we speak. So Dr. Parrish does a great job at doing kind of quarterly snapshots for our investor base of companies. So we do have an executive summary that's coming. There's one that's included at the beginning of the talent supply report. You'll see his open letter there. And our goal is to kind of have that reiterated, not just on the annual basis, but kind of every time that there's some type of major shift or major point that's happening with the Georgia economy or Georgia market or even the national, like a change of some kind that's impacting our employment. So we will be posting all of that through the website.
Perfect. So more to come. Spend time on the Metro Atlanta Chamber's website and you'll get a lot of great information. Well, Tim, Zach, Justin, really can't thank y'all as much for the report. More to come. Appreciate the partnership with y'all every day. Can't tell, we all know each other pretty well. So just grateful for y'all's work and grateful for the opportunity to work with y'all and kind of work on some of this session, but so much good feedback, and so just appreciate it. We're going to wrap up just here for a second. Get my slides back up. So if you are not a member of Max, we really encourage you to do so. These are some of the benefits that come. Max Minutes is available to everyone. And so we hope you share it with anyone you know that you think would be interested in the work and what we talk about. But we encourage you to join to continue to support our programs. Again, a special thanks to all of our anchor investors that make our programming possible. If you would like to become an anchor investor, please feel free to reach out to Joy or myself or Tim. Joy's your best contact, but we can get you to Joy. So we're happy to do that. But I appreciate the investment from all these companies to support workforce development in the state. And that is all for us. Again, thanks to Tim, Justin and Zach with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Great report, really excited, and more to come. Thanks everybody for joining this morning. Happy Friday, and hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you, Daniela.